even if it's free, we fail to vaccinate 100% of our children in every barangay. Okay? So who will share? Wait.
Ako po.
May permission ba kayo? Hindi ko pa na ano.
Wala pa po.
Lang. Okay, you may share screen now.
Okay na po ba? Kita niyo na po.
Wala pa.
Wala pa.
Ayan na. Okay.
Meron na po. So good afternoon, everyone. So our group, Block 7 clerks, De La Cruz del Llano and Espiritu, are going to report about the expanded program on immunization. So the expanded program on immunization, or EPI, was established in 1976 to ensure that infants and children and mothers have access to routinely recommended infant childhood vaccines. So there are 6 vaccine preventable diseases that are initially included in the EPI, which are the poliomyelitis, diphtheria, measles, tetanus, pertussis, and tuberculosis. So the overall goal of EPI is to reduce the morbidity and mortality among children against the most common vaccine preventable diseases. And its specific goals are to immunize all infants, children against the most common vaccine preventable diseases, to sustain polio-free status of the Philippines, to eliminate measles infection, to eliminate maternal and neonatal tetanus, to control diphtheria, pertussis, hepatitis B, and German measles, and to prevent extrapulmonary tuberculosis among children. So the program target is to achieve 95% fully immunized child coverage. So your fully immunized child is when the child receives 1 dose of BCG, 3 doses of Hep B, 3 doses of OPV, 3 doses of DPT, and a dose of measles vaccine before the child's first birthday. And the population included are your infants 0 to 12 months old, children 13 to 59 months, and pregnant mothers. So the program strategies includes conducting routine immunization for infants, children, women through reaching every barangay strategy. So into a strategy which aim to improve the access to routine immunization and reduce dropouts in the program. So all health centers are required to have at least 1 staff trained to follow through with this strategy, which includes collating data on vaccinated children, strengthening links between community and health sector, and supportive supervision, among others. Another is the supplemental immunization activities, which are conducted to reach children who have not been vaccinated or have not developed enough immunity after previous vaccinations. Another is strengthening vaccine preventable disease surveillance and procurement of adequate and potent vaccines and needles and syringes to all health facilities nationwide. So in Republic Act number 7846, which is an act requiring compulsory immunization against hepatitis B for infants and children below 8 years old, amending for purpose Presidential Decree 996 and appropriating funds therefore. So in 1993, through this Republic Act, the number of EPI diseases was expanded from 6 to 7 with the inclusion of hepatitis B. The Republic Act number 10152, or the Mandatory Infants and Children Health Immunization Act of 2011, So in 2011, through this Republic Act, the mandatory basic immunization now covers tuberculosis, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, poliomyelitis, measles, mumps, rubella or German measles, hepatitis B, and Haemophilus influenzae type B. So this is a childhood immunization schedule showing the recommended schedule of vaccines included in the API, as well as other vaccines which is now part of the National Immunization Program. Other recommended vaccines not included in the National Immunization Program are recommended by the Philippine Pediatric Society, Pediatric Infectious Disease Society of the Philippines, and the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination. Well, this is the actual child immunization record given by the DOH. And for the discussion of the vaccines included in the API, we have first the measles vaccine. The dose and route is 0.5 ml given subcutaneously, and the minimum age at first dose is 9 months. It may be given as early as 6 months of age in cases of outbreaks as declared by public health officials. So children who receive a dose of measles-containing vaccine at less than 12 months of age should be given 2 additional doses beginning at 12 through 15 months of age and separated by at least 4 weeks, the latter two preferably as the MMR. Another vaccine included is the Haemophilus influenzae type B conjugate vaccine, which is given 0.5 ml intramuscularly, and it is given at the minimum age of 6 weeks with a minimum interval of 4 weeks, that is 6, 10, 14 weeks of age. If the first dose was given between 7 through 11 months of age, the second dose should be given at least 4 weeks later, and the third dose at least 8 weeks from the second dose. For the booster dose, it should be given between 12 to 15 months with an interval of 6 months from the third dose. And 1 dose of Hib vaccine should be considered for unimmunized children 5 years old or older who have sickle cell disease, leukemia, HIV infection, or who had splenectomy.
So for the next set of vaccines, we have diphtheria, tetanus toxoid, acellular pertussis vaccine, or commonly known as your DTaP and DTaP-WP. So the usual dose and route is around 0.5 ml intramuscularly and usually given at the age of 6, 10, and 14 weeks of age. So it's usually given at a minimum age of 6 weeks with a minimum interval of 4 weeks. So the fourth dose may be given as early as 12 months, provided there is a minimum interval of 6 months from the third dose. And the fifth dose may not be given if the fourth dose was administered at age 4 years or older. So next slide. We have two kinds of your diphtheria vaccine. The other one would be your whole cell pertussis and your acellular. So for the whole cell, it's basically the whole component. It contains an endotoxin, which is different po from your acellular. However po, yung doses that are given are almost the same for both types of vaccine. And may danger lang po when giving whole cell pertussis because the endotoxin in this vaccine may cause shock, circulatory collapse, persistent screaming, convulsions, fever, and alterations in consciousness. Next, please. Next. So the next one would be your poliomyelitis vaccine or your polio vaccine, which has two types, your oral and your intramuscular. So for the oral, it's usually given at 2 to 3 drops per RM. And for your IPV, it's usually given at 0.05 ml intramuscularly. They differ when it comes to the age because for your oral, it's usually given at intervals of 6, 10, and 14 weeks old. While for your IPV, it may be given during the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 18th month. And then the next dose would be between the 4 to 6 years old. So if 4 or more doses have been given prior to the age of 4 years old, an additional dose should be administered at age 4 through 6 years. And if a combination of OPV and IPV are given as part of a series, a total of 4 doses should be administered regardless of the child's current age. Next, please. So for OPV, it's usually used for mass eradication cases, and it's the vaccine of choice for global eradication with proven impact on wild virus circulation. It's also easy to use, and it produces herd immunity, and is cheap. However, the eradication of the virus has not been yet proven. For IPV, it's often used in combination with other vaccines, and it's more expensive than your OPV. However, it's highly potent and immunogenic, and is usually indicated for unimmunized adults at risk for polio, for the immunocompromised, and those household contacts of the immunocompromised or immunodeficient. Next, please. So this is just an example of the vaccine record recommended by the DOH. Next. Next, for the Hep B vaccine, the dose and route would be 0.5 ml intramuscularly, and it's usually given at birth on the first month and the 6th month. So the first dose is usually given during the first 12 hours of life and may be counted as part of the 3-dose primary series. However, subsequent doses are given at least 4 weeks apart, with the third dose preferably given not earlier than the 24 weeks of age, and those infants whose mothers are Hep B positive should be given Hep B IG within 12 hours after birth. For booster doses, it's usually not recommended for healthy, normal hosts or adults, and it's only recommended for those who are immunocompromised or those who undergo hemodialysis. Next. So the fourth dose is usually needed for the following. So if the third dose is given at less than 24 weeks of age, and for patients using the API schedule of birth 6 and 14 weeks, and for preterms less than 2 kilograms whose first dose was given at birth. So preterm infants born to HBs antigen negative mothers who are medically stable may be given the first dose of Hep B vaccine at 30 days of chronological age regardless of weight, and this may be counted as part of the 3-dose primary series.
Next is Bacillus guerin vaccine or the BCG vaccine. So since TB is the fifth leading cause of death, with 75 persons die every day of TB, and the annual risk of infection is 2.3%, hence the development of BCG vaccine. So it is the only vaccine available for tuberculosis. So the age of administration is in newborn up to 12 months of up to 12 months old, preferably within the first 2 months of life. So for the dosage, 0.05 ml intradermal for newborns, and for 0.01 ml intradermal for 1 month old and above. So for the adverse reaction, since it is administered intradermal, most common adverse effect is abscess or ulcers at the sites, where in it forms a wheal, then pustule, then it will heal and form a scar. Since this is not the only non-prophylactic vaccine given intradermally, scar formation indicates proper administration of the vaccine. And another adverse reaction is axillary lymphadenopathy. And then it does not prevent acquisition of PTB, but it prevents its dissemination, such as miliary TB or PATS disease. And then PPD is recommended prior to BCG if any of the following is present. First is suspected congenital TB. Next is history of close contact to unknown or suspected TB, and clinical findings suggestive of TB. Next. Next is measles, mumps, rubella rubella vaccine or MMR. So mumps and rubella vaccines are given as one together with the measles at the age of 12 months. So for the dosage, 0.5 ml subcutaneous, two doses at least 4 weeks apart. Then the second doses or the catch-up dose, usually at 4 to 6 years old. Children less than 12 months given any measles-containing vaccine should receive additional 2 doses of MMR. timing of vaccine administration is important because Filipino infants become seronegative for transplacental transferred maternal antibodies earlier than foreign counterparts. And contrary to anti-vaxxers' belief, MMR does not lead to autism. Next. For to say it is a fully immunized child, there should be 1 dose of BCG at birth or any time before reaching 12 months, 3 doses of DPT and polio with at least 4 weeks interval between each dose, 1 dose of measles at 9 months or before 12 months, 3 doses of Hep B with at least 4 weeks interval between doses. Next. And other recommended vaccines, not part of the Philippine EPI, but because of the merit RE advocated by the PPS, PIDSP, and the Philippine Foundation of Vaccination. So this includes DTaP, hepatitis A, human papilloma virus, IPV, influenza, MMRV, pneumococcal rotavirus, Tdap, and varicella. Next. For vaccines for special groups, these are vaccines which are not part of the Philippine EPI or other recommended vaccines, but available data support its use in certain conditions or selected populations. These vaccines include meningococcal, rabies, and typhoid. That's all.
Okay. So you have, what's the main difference between your old and your new program? What's the vaccine included?
Hepa B po.
Hep B and influenza vaccine po, Doc.
And di ba nakalagay parang Japanese encephalitis din? You didn't come across
Sa National Immunization Program po yata, Doc. Kasama na po
National
siya.
Immunization Program, kasama na siya. Okay. So,
Yes po.
of course, you know the vaccines and what they are for. You've encountered this in pedia. What I would want to discuss this afternoon would be the barriers in administrating it. For example, in the health center, issues with vaccine. So, what are the reasons why a child, why we cannot reach that goal of 95% vaccination rate? What do you think are the barriers, and how do you think could we solve the problem with regards to vaccinating our children? And that is just the 2-year vaccination program, which would be the recommended. Talking about boosters in children, much more so in adults, exposes a much larger problem in our culture or our population looking at the culture of vaccination in general. Correct? Lalayo pa tayo. Kayo nung bata, do you remember having booster shots?
Yes, Doc.
Meron. Si
Opo.
Frances.
Yes
Ano
po,
ang
Doc.
booster shot mo? Naalala mo?
Doc, naalala ko lang po, tinuturukan ako sa puwet palagi. Palagi po nun.
Age 10. 10 years old?
Parang mga early elementary, Doc. So mga, opo, parang ganun po.
Early elementary. Well, good for you. Kasi ang next nung booster dose ng 10, 20 years old. So, if you are not, what? If you are not, for example, kayo, kailan lang kayo nyo na-update yung vaccination status nyo?
Yung ni-require po for
Yung
clerkship.
i-require. Yun ang problema. You wouldn't vaccinate yourself. The Filipino population would only vaccinate itself, adult ha, if it's required. Where else? Kayo kasi health worker. Seaman, kasi required. Hindi makakasampa ng barko if you don't actually get polio and your Yellow fever for some countries. Paulit-ulit pa kasi sometimes bureaucracy sets in. What happens? Kailangan Bureau of Quarantine ang nag-administer. So kahit may polio shot na, anong gagawin? Uulitin pa sa Bureau of Quarantine. Could you imagine? And that is easily 300 pesos for an OPV. Racket, di ba? Siyempre, nung nakikita ko, kasi meron kaming neighbor na Siban. Lahat sila seaman. Talagang you could just frown at the healthcare practices that they get, and that is sad. But again, that's another story. Okay? And medical students na kayo, and supposedly you are products of AB class. What more for your population that could very well do away with health expenditures? Of course, hindi na libre pagdating ng 10, 20 years old. The booster shots are not free. Our vaccines are what? Our free vaccines are for young, the 1 to 2, up to 2 years old even. And sometimes, what's the problem? Even if it's already free, do they actually get the shot? And what's the reason? What are some of the reasons?
Misinformation, Doc. Ay, sorry.
Misinformation. And what are the common misinformation that runs about?
Magkakasakit daw po lalo. I mean, nagdudulot daw po ng sakit yung pagpapabaksin.
Lalong magkakasakit. So, you have to explain. What? Siyempre, pagkabakuna, it's normal. It's within the normal what? Lalagnatin ng konti because it triggers, the mechanism of action of vaccine would be triggering the immune response. But if you do not explain the mechanism of action of your vaccine, and that is bound to happen. Okay? Ang sakit, what? Ang problema din kasi on our end, minsan sa dami ng babakunahan, lalo na if it's house to house. Nothing against the ones going around. It's not, sometimes they are not trained for it, one. Pangalawa, sa dami, the faster, the better. Basta kailangan siyang turukan, sabi ng barangay. O sabi ni Kapitan, kailangan turukan. But actually explaining why, taking the time to explain the nitty-gritty, very seldom do you see people, barangay health workers do it. Some do. Okay? What are their other barriers? Buti hindi pa masyado prevalent dito na mention kanina ni EJ.
Yung fear po, Doc.
Fear
Regarding sa
brought
vaccines.
about by anti-vaxxers.
Yes, Doc.
Pero medyo lumalabas na din dito because syempre nakikita sa Facebook, etc. And what's the contention of your anti-vaxxers?
Doc, some anti-vaxxers po, they think that, for example, your measles vaccine, Doc, can cause autism or other diseases po,
Okay.
Doc.
Most often dragged into the vaccination issue would be the issue of autism. Okay. How would you convince, for example, you are a GP eventually and you are to vaccinate in your private practice, etc., etc. How are you to convince your patient that vaccination would not cause autism?
Doc, we can say that the vaccination is purely immune response and nothing to do with the genetics po. And mostly ang autism is caused by genetics.
Okay, autism is caused by genetics and not a direct result of your vaccine. Ano po yung genetics? Tawanan mo lang. Basta genetics.
Yung namamana po, ganun.
Ang autism, sakit siya na namamana, something like that. So, actually going through this immunization explanation actually takes more time than just the actual vaccination shot. That's why education is very much important. Health education is very much important. What are your other barriers that you could think of?
Doc, siguro po another barrier po would be accessibility, Doc. Because, Doc, in far-flung areas po, Doc, hindi po lahat kaya po na magpunta sa health center or sa nearest healthcare facility po, Doc. And usually, Doc, in far-flung areas din po, limited din po yung supplies ng vaccines po na available po, especially sa children.
Okay, accessibility. So, is it accessible in your health center? What's the common issue?
Doc, sometimes po
January
Wala
wala
pong
pa.
supply.
yun, supply po.
Hindi pa na-approve yung budget, hindi pa dumadating yung procured vaccination for the year. Come October, November, December, wala na. Because the health center has used up all their appropriations. So, saan ang takbo ng tao? Well and good if they go to a private practitioner. But could you imagine the cost of vaccination from your private GP or your pediatrician? Could you imagine how much it would cost? In general, mura na yung magbigay ng vaccine na 1K or 1.5 per shot. Per disease. Imagine 5 in 1, 6 in 1. And that would be very costly. Well, truth of the fact is pediatricians, that is their bread and butter. That immunization regimen for the first 2 years of life. But there's a need because in the health center, it's not always available. And again, the notion again of other people that private is better than your healthcare services, health center services, which should not be the case because you know well and good that the vaccinations are one and the same, the sources are the same. It just matters kung sino yung magtuturo. Okay? What's the other? Far-flung areas. Hindi accessible because it's not possible to establish a health center in every nook and cranny of a barangay. Paano yung mga bulubundukin? Okay? Paano yung mga in a war area na hindi operational ang mga health center? Then you go door to door. And of course, the limitations of door to door is just so. I remember when I was in my undergrad was community development. We have to go door to door per day. Target. Bunubundukin yung area ko. And the interval from one house to another was 30 minutes, 1 hour, etc. So target is 3 houses per day. And that is the reality of every health center barangay, if they want to bring health to the community door to door. Sometimes it's not possible because health center would lalo na sa mga ganyang probinsya, your health centers would lack, of course, your personnel. Iisa ang barangay health worker. Minsan wala pang doktor, minsan wala pang nurse. Palalabasin mo pa yung health worker mo? And sometimes those are the choices that our public health system sometimes have to make. It's not that they don't want to do their job. Sometimes the very logistics of being in the system prevents them from doing so. Yan yung alam nila kung ano, alam natin kung ano yung dapat gawin, pero there are other factors that we should take into consideration. Okay. If any of you could think of any barrier, how could we solve this? How could we improve our vaccination rate? Actually, it's better. Actually, it's easier to convince the patient compared to the pre-pandemic. It's easier to convince patients now to vaccinate. But remember, pre-pandemic, their measles outbreak occurred. And that is a direct result of what? Our failure to vaccinate and follow our national immunization program. Come pandemic, everyone is clamoring for vaccination of your coronavirus, and it's become a hot issue. Again, another topic that would live for another day. That's another topic altogether. But the awareness for vaccine now is very higher. Now that coronavirus, what won? Your flu shot won because of the lack of pre-pandemic updated flu shot, updated pneumococcal. For what it's worth, it provides a little protection for respiratory diseases, short of having your coronavirus vaccine, especially it wasn't existent last year. Okay, but prior to that, for example, for obstetrics, in our practice, very much, it's tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis prior to pregnancy, MMR after delivery, and again, another tetanus, diphtheria shot. If it's flu season, flu season. If I screen that patient does not have titers for hepatitis and does not have titers for rubella, so that is the armamentarium and other vaccination opportunities. How many actually avail? Some would say that they cannot afford. Some I would point to the health center, at least they would get a tetanus toxoid there. But you see the importance of diphtheria and pertussis as well in your report. But like it or not, you get the vaccine at a cost. You have a cost for cold storage. That's why you cannot give it at cost price. So you really would reach 1,000 and 1,500. Okay? But it's easier now to convince, and sometimes they will be the ones to ask you for vaccination because the awareness is very much higher. Okay? What else? May isa pa bang report o ito lang?
Ito lang po, Doc. Sa Thursday na
Sa
po yun.
Thursday po yung TB.
Thursday yung TB, di ba? Sige. Okay. So,
Yes po, Doc.
baka kasi ma-carried away ako, walang tayong oras. Okay, so what else? How could you convince in general, the population that vaccination is important and our very important concept? For example, punta na tayo sa coronavirus vaccine. Why is it important to have the vaccine?
Doc, parang meron po akong nakita sa internet na sabi na parang it's better to get some sort of protection than parang baseline zero protection po tayo if we're not going to get the vaccine po.
Kahit hindi ka sure, again, that's another story.
Yes.
For example, sige ha, given that argument, Abby, Sinovac becomes available. Would you get it for yourself?
Personally po, Doc, no po.
Oh, akala ko ba ang sagot mo, it's better to get, ano yun?
Diba, Doc, share ko lang po. Share ko lang po yung nabasa ko, Doc.
So it means that you do not agree with that it's better to get, ano yun, some protection than none at all. Because that is the argument, since binuksan mo na rin lang, that's the argument for your Sinovac vaccine, correct? 50%? Yes, di ba gumawa pa ng vaccine? Anyways. So, 50% efficacy. Okay. So, no. EJ, no din.
Yes, Doc.
May magpapasinovac ba? Wala. Because, why? Why won't you get it for yourself?
Doc, yung efficacy rate po kasi niya is sobrang baba po. And based po dun sa ni-report natin last time regarding efficacy of the vaccine is there's a 50-50 chance that you will be protected po if there's a 50% efficacy rate po.
Para kang ano yun? Ano yung mga 50-50 probability ng mga sugal? Para kang nag-rush, nag-roulette, black or red, ganun.
Yes, Doc.
So, kung Pfizer or AstraZeneca, your chances become better.
Yes po.
Papayag ka na pag Pfizer, pag Moderna.
Yes po, Doc.
Will you get it for yourself?
Yes, Doc. Because expert na po yung nagsabi and based na rin po sa study na 90% po yung efficacy. So there's only 10% chance na hindi ka mapoprotektan and 90% na mag-work po yung vaccine.
So for example, for efficacy or coverage, a good example would be your human papillomavirus vaccine. By the way, have you got your HPV shots? Kung
Yes,
wala,
po,
oras na para
Yes, po,
magpabakuna ng HPV, ha? Anyways, anong meron ka? Quadrivalent? Bivalent? Oh, iniisip. Cervarix o Gardasil? O magsabi na ng brand.
Cervarix po.
Cervarix, Doc.
Cervarix. So, Cervarix is what? It's your bivalent. By the way, EJ, hindi ka exempted. It's also given to males, contrary to popular belief. Okay. So, your Cervarix bivalent covers HPV 16 and 18. Okay. Your quadrivalent is your Gardasil. It covers for 2 more variants of your HPV which causes genital warts. Okay. So, there's a non-valent vaccine that was just released 2 years ago which covers 5 more HPV variants which cause. So what's the difference? Why will I get the non-valent vaccine over the others? Pricing, Cervarix could now be availed at around 2,000 pesos. maybe even cheaper. Your Gardasil is around 3,000 to 5,000 pesos. Of course, your non-availant becomes is the expensive one because it's the newest drug. It costs around 8,000 to 10,000 depends on where you get it. So, what's the difference? Coverage. So, as far as cervical cancer is concerned, efficacy, it covers for all and all would be equally efficient. However, they say cross contamination or cross infection. What did we say? If you do not prevent your genital wart variant, it could eventually mutate into cervical cancer in the long run. So it's important to protect yourself from genital warts as well. And that is not including the genital wart condyloma acuminata disease by itself. Okay? So your Gardasil covers for two of the most common causes of genital warts, while additional five variants would be caused by your non-availant. Okay, so your Gardasil would cover around 70% of your genital warts. Okay, your non-availant, the new one, would achieve as much as 90%. Okay, so that is the main difference. So what happens now? What should be the choice if you are to choose? Pero iisipin mo, hindi ba mas cost effective pa rin yung 70%? Pero para sa mga ok-ok, mga obsessive compulsive, I don't want to risk that 20% chance. Pero naturukan na kayo lahat, no? So for example, kayo, virgin case of no HPV shot. What would you choose for yourself? Frances, mute ka eh.
Doc, ano po, siguro yung quadrivalent para at least may protection po. Gardasil, Doc.
Gardasil pa din.
Opo.
Yun,
Kaya
hayaan
lang,
mo
Doc.
na yung 20% na natira.
Opo. Kasi, Doc,
Fair
ano
enough.
po eh, sa akin po kasi nun, Doc, kaya po ako nag-opt ng Cervarix. Kasi, Doc, yun lang po yung available at that moment. Saka mas cost-effective siya. Like, mas mura. Pero ano, Doc, if given the chance, Doc, siguro Gardasil po
Nagbago
para...
ng answer ha. Honestly ako, kami, nakapagpa first dose na kami ng Cervarix, biglang lumabas yung Gardasil. Mga OB kami ha, inulit namin yung Gardasil. Kasi it's a vaccine that was released during our time and it's continually changing. In fact, the non-availant was just released 2 years ago. Yun. Other opinions? Abby?
Doc, Gardasil din po, Doc.
Gardasil. Cost
For me.
effectiveness.
Yes.
Mabigat yung 10,000
Yes, Doc.
per vaccine And actually, honestly, it's not available here. Last year, your non-availant vaccine was available. However, the makers pulled it out. Why do you think was it pulled out? Could you fathom a guess? Why do you think was it pulled out?
Safety, Doc? or
Safety?
adverse effects? I don't, wala lang do.
Well, it has a good safety profile. Actually, the makers of your non-availed is the same makers as your Gardasil. In-improve lang nila. But what's the problem as far as the Philippines is concerned?
Dok, baka po yung cost.
Cost, which led to
Discontinuation ng pagbenta dito.
discontinuation ng benta because
Walang profit do,
Walang
masyado.
walang profit kasi walang bumibili.
Walang nagpapatak.
Walang nagpapaturok, and because of the same reasons that you have, you will still choose Gardasil despite the 20% difference. Low vaccination use. So what did the vaccine maker do? They pulled it out in the Philippines and transferred it to the countries that would have a higher utilization rate. Okay? So, as of 2020, kahit pre-pandemic pa, the Nona vaccine was pulled out from the country. Sabi ko, papabili na lang ako sa mga Indian students. Wala din. Low din ang utilization nila, kasama sila sa listahan ng na-pull out. Okay? So what else? For vaccination, what's the favorite concept of public health? And you would try to explain this to every person that would be in the argument of vaccination. Pag na-vaccine ako, I could not wear the mask anymore. We could all go out, etc., etc.
Doc, yung belief na pag na-vaccinate ka na, you're 100% protected from the disease po. But hindi po talaga yun. I mean, but that's not actually true po regarding sa vaccines. Yun po yung belief ng
So for
mga tao.
example, you meet someone, pag na-vaccinate na ako, pwede nang lumabas. How would you explain it to the layman?
Kumbaga pag nabakunahan ka na, parang hindi ikaw ang mapoprotektahan pagkus yung ibang tao ang mapoprotektahan sa'yo. Ganun, Doc?
What concept is that? How do you call that concept?
Herd immunity po.
Oh, sige mo, Nina, explain herd immunity. Paborito yan ni Dr. Sandowiz, nagpa-exam lang si Sir eh.
Doc, herd immunity po is when a sufficient number of people got vaccinated. So, it can parang magkakaroon na po ng immunity yung parang group sa isang local.
Okay?
Because mababawas po yung mababawas na po yung transmission and parang prevalence ng disease dun sa population involved.
Because majority would be protected. Even if you cannot totally eradicate the disease. Okay? So it's like what? For example, 7 kasama ko, 7 tayo. Ako lang yung hindi vaccinated. Ganyan ang gawain ko kasi diabetic ako, so technically hindi ako pwede sa mga matatapang na vaccine. So ang gagawin ko, ang laging may flu shot yung mga tao sa bahay. Something like that. Why? Because ganun din sa baby. That's the concept of herd immunity. Why do you have to vaccinate for MMR? The mother, at least the mother and the father for your newborn.
Because possible po na maging carrier po yung mother.
Okay. And how does it help your child?
Because of the vaccine po, 'di ba nagkakaroon tayo ng antibodies. So once the virus enter the body of the mother, so there's an immune response po. So the virus will be either killed or inactivated. So hindi na po matatransmit sa child
Ba't
po.
hindi na lang diretsong paglabas ni baby, turo ka ng MMR?
Because doc, there's still a maternal antibodies pa po dun sa baby po.
Hindi mo tuturukan si mami ng MMR habang buntis. Same way you cannot inject the baby until how many months old with
For
MMR?
12 months po.
9 to 12 months. Actually, with the outbreak, they adjusted it to
6
6
months.
months. Okay? Why is that so? Why cannot it be earlier? Bakit inurong na nga lang hindi pagnawang at birth?
Doc, yung report ko po nun sa Pedia, like may journal po, na kapag less than 6 months po, yung pagturok, hindi po siya magpo-produce ng strong immunity, unlike pag dun po sa optimal talaga na time.
Okay, that's one. What else? What is your MMR vaccine? Bakit yung hepatitis pwede? Bakit yung polio, etc. Habagay oral lang yung polio. O bakit yung hepa, etc. pwede? MMR hindi pwede.
MMR po, Doc, is an attenuated po, meaning
So it's
buhay pa
a
po
live
yung
vaccine.
yes
So
po.
the immune response is quite different compared to your non-live vaccine. Okay, that's correct. So herd immunity. So eventually, herd immunity will achieve if enough people get vaccinated. I think there's one country that did not do lockdown. I am failing to... Sinong nakakaalala? Hindi nag-lockdown. I think it's Switzerland that they did not close down because they wanted to achieve herd immunity naturally. What is your take on that?
Doc, it's too risky po. Because at that time po, hindi pa na alam yung nature ng virus. So, wala pong enough information on how the virus works po.
Okay. So it was a gamble on their part which kind of backfired. They allowed it to hoping that it would die down because others would get naturally immune, but it did not happen. Experts say that herd immunity can only be achieved through vaccination and not through natural immunity. Okay. So what else? What else would be issues with regards to vaccination?
Doc, nung clerk po ako, may iba pong nanay sa health center. Akala po nila may bayad yung vaccine.
May?
Nung clerk po ako, Doc, like nung nasa health center po kami, may iba pong parents na parang misinformed. Akala po nila kahit po sa health center may bayad yung vaccine. Kaya po ayaw daw nila nung una pumunta.
Well, your system also fails to address that issue. Anong nangyayari? What happens? Are you
Doc,
nag-duty na ba kayo sa health center at least for Monina and Ronwell?
yes po.
Pag bakuna day, ano ang meron? Which we
Doc,
should go away from?
Doc, marami naman pong pumupunta pero po parang hindi po lahat informed.
With in connection to the may bayad.
Doc, di ko po alam bakit feeling nila may bayad pero baka mamaya may ibang
Baka sa health center mo wala nun, swerte. You know what the actual setup of some health centers would be? Sa bakuna table, may box, donation box. If you're the mother or you're the parent that would have your child vaccinated, would you be compelled to at least put something on that box? Sometimes the body language of the health center worker would even encourage, albeit not explicitly, to donate. Hence, some notion of some parents or some of the constituents that healthcare services, not just vaccination services, have payment, like it or not. Some health centers operate that way. I'm not saying all, but it does happen. It does happen. How could you solve that? Again, we go back to the what? Again, we go back to the economic, social, political construct. Remember your barangay health center, although in theory it aims to bring health to the people. Could you imagine how much the allowance of a barangay health worker would be?
Yes, Doc. Before, Doc, nung sa community practicum po namin, kasama po namin yung BHW, Doc. 500 per month lang daw po usually. And then they get additional benefits po din since they're part po of the 4Ps. Minsan nga po, Doc, ang sinasabi po sa amin, yung 500 daw po na binibigay sa kanila, kulang pa daw
Delayed
po
po.
po, Doc. And yung bulk po ng work na they have to do, lalo na po sa mga BHW, Doc, hindi po siya equal or
Hindi
paramount
siya,
dun sa...
it's not actually, what's
Opo.
that? I
Hindi siya,
failed to.
hindi po
Siya
siya,
consummate or hindi siya appropriate. Okay?
Opo, para po dun sa binibigay na allowance sa kanila,
So,
Doc.
when you learned of that fact, ano inisip mo sa BHW?
Doc, paano po ba? Kasi parang nangyayari po yung sa barangay po na napuntahan namin before, Doc. Napilit lang daw po siyang mag-BHW kasi walang mag-fill ng place. Tapos,
Pilitan.
opo, Doc, kasi wala nga pong gusto ding mag-BHW dahil nga po, Doc, yung paperworks and yung mga kailangan pong gawin, maliit po masyado din yung sweldo. So, siya, parang, lang siya, Doc, name on the paper na BHW. So, ang ginagawa niya lang po, Doc, is, hindi naman po, Doc, sa pang-aano dun sa BHW. Naintindihan ko rin po, Doc, kung bakit ganun yung ginagawa nila. Kasi, Doc, may pinapasa po, diba, yearly na mga BNS
Pangalan.
report. Tsaka report, Doc, sa munisipyo, Doc.
Progress report.
Opo, kailangan nila magpasa ng report. So, minsan, Doc, ang ginagawa, nagsistage sila ng something for documentation, Doc, na maipapasa nila, Doc, sa munisipyo. Pero yung aminado po yung BHW nung time na yun sa amin, Doc, na most of the time, Doc, yung trabaho niya po talaga hindi niya talagang nagagawa ng maayos. Kasi, Doc, yung sa community rin po na napuntahan namin before, farming community siya, Doc. So, yung mga bahay po, Doc, layo-layo din from the barangay health center. Yung BHW, Doc, medyo elderly na siya. So, hindi na po niya napupuntahan isa-isa din yung mga bahay and na-check po yung mga tao. And usually, Doc, kung sino lang po yung pumupunta sa health center, yun lang din po yung napa-follow up niya, lalo na po sa vaccination. Kaya, Doc, sa ibang lugar po, Doc, yung ibang lugar nga po, Doc, usually, maswerte na daw po kapag may BHW and BNS or Barangay Nutrition Scholar. Pero sa kasi nga Doc, yun nga po, bukod sa mababa po yung binibigay na sweldo sa kanila Doc, yung ano din po sa kanila ng mga public health officials, yung support Doc sa mga programs, wala po masyado. Kagaya po nung sa community namin Doc, ano po, sa appropriations, annual appropriations or budget po nila, yung health budget Doc nasa 5,000 lang for the whole year. Tapos lahat po yun Doc, paghahatian na po yun Doc ng BHW, ng BNS, and yung mga kung ano pa pong kailangan sa barangay. So, sobrang kulang po talaga Doc, and walang masyadong focus Doc sa public health Doc, lalo na po sa mga far-flung communities.
Okay. Anong undergrad po? What's your undergrad?
BS
Nursing?
Community Nutrition Doc, UP Diliman po.
Kaya pala. Alright. So, and you are, well, community nutrition focuses on more on the nutrition and community aspect of it. And again, there are a lot of more problems that we can talk about if we focus on community. Okay? And sometimes, your BH, could you imagine 500 pesos? Anong mabibili mo sa 500 pesos? Pang Starbucks yun, pang sanggip nyo lang yun eh. Okay? And yet, what? Some PHWs are there where yung napuntahan mo on paper lang. But you will find BHWs that are actually there because they believe that they could be a difference being a barangay health worker. And although often these are elderly women, commonly ang nangyayari dito yung mga, forgive me for the term, wala nang magawa sa buhay. Meaning what? Tapos na yung mga anak, etc., etc. Minsan ayaw mag-alaga ng apo, magbi-BHW na lang. It gets them out of the house. Why? Kasi nga sa bahay, ano din, yun nga, they take care of the apo, etc., etc. And actually, being a barangay health worker would give them a sense of purpose even beyond, yun nga, tapos na yung mga anak, namatay na yung asawa, etc., etc. And that is the most common profile of your barangay health worker. Like it or not, again, in any leadership or any structured organization, we have to look at the sustainability of the program. So ano yun, hihintayin mo yung mga iba na tumanda din na ganun din ang buhay. I would like to believe that if we give actually adequate compensation, wag naman 500 pesos, di ba? Parang mas mataas na ngayon. Adequate compensation to these barangay health workers, then it would become more sustainable. However, it would largely depend on your local government unit and how it manages its health center. And that is the power of what? Your LGU and your decentralized government, wherein it could work both ways. It could work both for good or bad depending on your LGU and the priority of such. For example, we are in Cavite. Public health sector of Cavite, what is the common notion? For example, taga-Bacoor ka. Sinong taga-Bacoor dito? Okay. Taga-Bacoor ka. Where do the people of Bacoor go if they need a public hospital?
PGH Doc.
Punta ng PGH. PGH agad, 'di ba? Kaya kami, when I was in PGH, basta ay galing Cavite. Lalo na motorcycle accident, kaya ay galing Cavite 'yan. Saan pa sila bumabagsak? Las Piñas District. Saan pa ang next? Minsan Batangas Regional. Why? Pero may Southern Regional Hospital in the middle of Aguinaldo Highway, malapit sa SM Bacoor. What's the problem?
tingin po kasi nila if they go to PGH doc, mas higher yung chances ng recovery nila and better healthcare services.
Better healthcare system kasi tertiary. Sige. So, the trust rating PGH compared your other district hospitals or your regional hospitals, the discrepancy is very large. Okay, what else?
Yung cost po siguro, Doc, iniisip ng iba mas mura po, Doc, pag doon sila napunta.
Mas mura? Hindi ba mas gagalangin ng pirma nila ni Mercado sa regional hospital or ni sino si Governor Remulla? Compare, habagay tinatanggap din ng papirma doon sa PGH. Okay?
Doc, siguro po sa Bacoor kasi Doc, may Cavitex or yung Coastal Expressway Doc. And if from Bacoor po kayo Doc, tas pupunta kayo ng Manila Doc, kaya Doc 10 minutes. Opo, 10 to 15 minutes Doc, nasa Manila na. So, mas mabilis Doc na takbuhan din ng mga tao.
Ang Southern Regional Hospital ng Bacoor nasa tapat ng Revilla Park. O ganun ba kalayo? Tagong-tago nga lang no? Anyways, what happened to Cavite was there was a power struggle between that district hospital that eventually became a regional hospital between Revilla Senior and the governor. Bacoor made a district hospital on the land of Revilla Senior. However, Bacoor as a city cannot operate the hospital with their own city budget. That's why bigla siya naging regional hospital. They eventually admitted to themselves that they cannot operate it on their own expenses. So they needed the provincial government to step in. Ayaw sana because they said it was a legacy of the Revilla Senior. They wanted it to remain with Bacoor. However, sayang yung infrastructure, pasok sa regional. Ngayon lang medyo nag-i-improve. But before, matatawa ka because in Cavite, the health centers, in Bacoor at least, the health centers may doktor. Sa district, walang doktor. So, saan ka pupunta? Sa health center or sa city health office. And those would be your structural economic problems when you deal with public health, LGU-based health services, etc., etc. And there are a lot of issues that you will see. Mas maganda sana pag umabot kayo, at least for the clerks, at least Monina and Ronowell, I think, would have some exposure already to your health centers. And it's like any other institution or any other workplace full of intrigues and sometimes red tape, etc., that you have to walk through. Well, time and again, I would have clerks or interns having issues with the midwives, minsan nakikipag-away sa midwife, etc., things like that. O minsan kayo nag-aaway. Pero that's part of interpersonal relationships. Actually, in my opinion, yan ang na-miss ng mga clerks na ganito lang, na online. 'Di ba, Monina and Ronowell? Yung black mates na hindi naman maiiwasan na eventually you have disagreements. Pero masarap mahirap pag-away pero masarap ding magbati. And that human interaction is with each other and with your patients, because clerkship and internship would be one of the experiences that you will carry for life. Okay,
Tsaka
pag
po, Dok, yung
nag-reunion,
nag-aagawan ng chart sa nurses station.
nag-aagawan,
Ganun.
nagtataguan ng
Opo,
chart.
Dok.
Saan ka nag-internship?
Dok, ako.
Monica?
Nag-clerkship po, Dok.
Ay,
Meron,
clerkship pala.
may part po, Dok, sa JR, may part po sa
O,
UST
public.
Hospital.
Yun.
Opo, Dok.
So, wag kang, diba? Ganito mga style dyan. Ano ang shift ng nurse?
Every,
Shift out sila ng 6. Ay, tama ba?
6:10 po. 6:10
6 to 10.
10 po.
Okay?
Opo.
So, pagdating ng basta 1 hour before their shift ends, wag ka magra-rounds. Wala ka makikitang chart. Because ayaw na nilang madagdagan yung i-carry out nila. Kasi madadagdagan yung i-endorse nila. Kasi na-close na nila yon 1 hour before. So, ang gagawin nila, itatago nila yung chart. O, diba? Ang saya. So, ikaw naman, inutusan ka ng residente mo. Kailangan, nasulat mo siya kasi nakalimutan niya. Na nautusan naman ng consultant niya na isulat yon. So, utos sa, like it or not, you are the bottom of the totem po. So, ang goal mo lang, masulat yon. Pero nawawala ang chart. Okay? Anong gagawin mo? Ginagawa mo?
Dok, naghihintay na lang po muna.
Hintay
Or
kang yung chart.
Opo, Dok. Or mag-rounds muna po ako or mag-VVS, ganun. Kung may Q1 po ako, ganun. Tapos po balik-balik na lang po ako doon, ganun.
Hanggang sa lumabas. Anong oras siya lalabas? 7:00.
Yung mga alanganing
6:30.
oras po, Dok, ganun siya lumalabas.
That's the buhay, that's the life of a clerk. Yeah, buhay ospital. And sana eventually face-to-face with resume because you're missing so much on clinical exposure and the joyous experiences of going on duty. Okay? And actually, believe you, after 5-10 years, reunion, homecoming, you tell the same stories over and over again. Pare-pareho ang pinagkwentuhan, mga kalokohan nung clerk. Mga vital signs na hindi totoo. Mga ano pa ba. Lahat naman dumaan dyan. QT. Ano yan? Di ba may Q1, Q2, Q4, Q8, Q-shift. Ano yung QT?
Q-tingin.
Tingin po.
Hindi na pala humihinga. Susulat na ng vital signs. Nagawa mo na lahat. O, di ba? Kumpleto pa yan. May RR, may heart rate, may temperature pa. O, di ba? Hopefully, you will get that hospital experience eventually. You're missing out on so much, in my opinion. Okay? Ano pa? Sige. I think we've discussed immunization. Any issues on immunization that you could think of? Sana we eventually reach the awareness that vaccination is an integral part of our healthcare. Because prevention is so much so an important, a critical part in maintaining a healthy society. But like it or not, we are on that paradigm of hospital-centered, treatment-centered, etc. For example, ginawang example lang kapatid ko, no? Ang kapatid ko, ortho. So, anong pinagdadasal niya lagi? Sana may maksidente. O, diba? Instead na how to prevent fall. Diba sa public health, ganon. How to prevent fall. Diba? Pero if it becomes such as that prevention of fall would be very much aware of, paano nga naman ang practice ng ortho? So we cannot, if we think for ourselves, for our own subspecialty, paano yon? Diba? It would really take a big paradigm shift of your orientation of how health should be approached for you to publicly grasp the importance of public health. Diba? That is the dilemma. That's why it won't really take off, because paano mabubuhay ang doktor kung wala yung patients, if health is if disease is absent and health is there. Ang problema din, what is the common health seeking behavior of our Filipino patients?
Basta
Pupunta
kaya pa
na.
pong tiisin.
Ano na?
Basta kaya pa pong tiisin, Doc. Oo, hindi pa po magpapadoktor.
Basta
Doon ka lang
kaya
po pag malala na.
hindi magpapadoktor. Okay. So our health seeking behavior is that bad. Okay? Much more prevention. Okay? Wala namang nararamdaman eh. Okay? That's why antibiotic resistant, you see, a lot of problems are really intermingled. Wala nang naramdaman. After 2 days, tinigil na si antibiotics. Again, that's another topic for us to discuss. And you will see the gamut of issues. If you are a public health advocate, everything is rolled into one. Wala pa si climate change dyan, ha? Okay? So, health-seeking behavior. So, di wala ng pasyente. So, if you focus on prevention, so, for example, ako OB, ano ang prevention? Prevent pregnancy. O, kung prevent mo ang pregnancy, o paano na? Wala nang buntis. Actually, marami pa ding nabubuntis. Meron nga ako nilagyan ng IUD, nabuntis pa din. Diyos ko, bukas ko pa makikita. Ano kaya nangyari sa kanya? Baka na-expel yung IUD niya. Sabi, nagpadala sa akin preg test. Kalalagay ko lang ng IUD sa kanya mga 2 months ago. Buntis siya. Okay, anyways. So, what else? Prevent morbidity, yun ang problema din. For example, ngayon, prenatal care is very bad because of the pandemic. And that results in a lot of morbidity come delivery time. So we're finding a lot of oligo, a lot of preterm with these quarantine babies that we are experiencing. Okay? So remember, in public health, we always have to prevent disease. First, one has to be aware of it. One has to be aware of it before we could be able to prevent. Hello? May klase lang ako, bakit? Same pa. Okay. 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 Sorry about that. So you have to take that into consideration. Okay? Any questions? Any more concerns with regards to immunization and the other topics that we discussed, albeit just a touch of it?
Dok, naalala ko lang po,
Sige.
sa mga health center po na may mga clerk, yung mga patients po ayaw nila sa amin kasi lagi nila sinasabi pinagpa-practicean daw sila.
How will you change that notion? Well, that happens in anywhere, and that is also one of your roadblocks when you are clerks and interns. Kahit intern, ayaw nila. Yung sa iba sa ospital. And why is that so? Why do you think?
Dok, minsan po kasi, like, ako po rin nung una, parang medyo hesitant po ko. Parang gusto po ata nila nakikita na confident ka sa ginagawa mo.
Yeah, confidence
Parang,
always. Like it or not, your confidence will come with experience and the time and the number of patients that you deal with. Tapos minsan, it does not help na nagpa-practice kayo sa harap ng pasyente. Sometimes it happens, right?
Opo.
So, what signal, remember back in PrevMed 1, we talk of communication skills. It's just not verbal, it's also non-verbal cues. And the number one in your non-verbal cues would be what? Your eye contact, the way you carry yourself. Tingin pa lang ng pasyente, alam nila, lalo na sa mga sa JR ba to? Lalo na sa public health hospitals, government hospital, wherein day in and day out, they see the turnover of new clerks, new interns, new residents. And more often, you will see that in your experienced nurses. Yan pa isa sa mga people who would make or break you in a hospital. How your relationship would be with your nurses. They could help you and make your life easier, and they could make your life hell. Tatago nila yung chart sa'yo. Pero pag gusto ka nila, alam nilang ikaw ang naghahanap, lalabas ang chart. Would you believe? Lalabas ang chart. Kahit
Dok,
ano yan.
meron po akong meron po akong
555.
classmate. Mahilig po siya magbigay ng mga food sa nurses. Like, dilibre niya po yung buong department. Kaya po pag siya yung nandun, laging nakalabas lahat.
That's one strategy. Strategy ko yan sa IW kasi may libreng breakfast, 'di ba, ang clerk at intern sa PGH. Hindi naman ako nagko-coffee. So yung coffee automatic nasa bulsa ko. Ano yan? Para pag kunwari may nakita akong may kailangan akong tulak na stretcher, well, that is also a reality in your public health hospital. Kung clerk at intern ka, ikaw ang magtutulak ng stretcher. Okay? So, automatic yan. Nasa bulsa ko yung mga kape ko. O, pag may kailangan akong itulak, yun. Manong, sabay abot ng kape. Pag merienda, that's one part of strategy. And actually, more than that, food, more than that, minsan monetary, minsan token, pariga-regalo. It's the respect that you give their profession. Remember, as clerks at interns, you would become doctors eventually. Although bagito ka, they have been nurses way ahead of you. And believe me, their experience, kahit sila ay nurse, sobra pa sa knowledge nyo at that point in time, as you as clerks, you as interns. Minsan, mas magaling pa sila mag-IV at mag-catheter sa inyo. Sila yung may alam ng gamot because they see it routinely for years already. And sometimes you listen to them and give the respect that they deserve. Yun lang. Yun lang kailangan nila. Remember that again, their compensation pre-pandemic or with this pandemic, hindi sufficient. Could you imagine their compensation for a private hospital? Minsan 20,000 per month. Sometimes they would have pay slips of 6,000 per 15th and 30. Kinaltas na kasi SSS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, etc. So, 9,000 gross pay, take home 6,000. O di ba lamang sila ng konti sa BHW? And remember, with the pandemic, exposure to coronavirus. And again, that's another issue that could be discussed.
Actually po, Doc,
Nina?
parang most po ng skills-based na learning po natutunan ko sa
Nurse.
nurses.
Totoo ka. They would be the ones who would, not your consultants, unless sa OR, pero the ones, pag IV, pag-compute ng drip rate, eyeball na lang minsan yung drip rate nila, pero ang galing, kung computein mo sa relo mo, tama. Pero because that's experience, and get some of their knowledge. They have a wealth of experience as well. Kung paano mag-akit ng pasyente, yung kalakaran. Ultimo, siyempre sa umpisa, you are new at the hospital. Ultimo, saan yung bulak, saan yung ganito, etc., etc. They would be the ones to help you. Yun din pang kulang sa inyo. I do wish that face-to-face comes into play sooner or later. Your skills, IV insertion, Foley catheter, anong mga ayaw na ayaw kong gawin sa clerk? Extraction, ayoko sa pedya, ayoko talaga, kaya hindi ako nagpedya. NGT insertion, oh my God, yan. Sa 4-year-old na galit sa'yo, mga ganun. Okay? Sige. Pinag-usapan niyo ba kung anong topic natin next para ma-assign na natin maaga? Sa mga medyo na-discuss natin within the day or any topic that you are interested in. Para sa inyo naman manggaling yung topic na gusto nyo or interested kayo to discuss as a group. Thursday, TB na tayo, ha, tuberculosis. What interests you? EJ, ano?
Dok, di pa kami nakakapag-decide.
Di pa kayo nakakapag-decide. Last week ko pa tanong to eh. Sige. Pipili tayo. EJ, ikaw, anong gusto mo?
Doc, sa akin personally po, because di ba nga po hot issue ngayon ng PhilHealth. So parang gusto ko yung i-discuss. Kasi as of now, ang dami pong parang nagke-question na po ng credibility ng PhilHealth. Ganun po.
PhilHealth, how it works, ganyan. Tapos corruption issues.
Yes po. And then, paano din po ano yung compensation ng doctor sa PhilHealth? Ganun.
Compensation ng doctor sa PhilHealth. Ironically, January pa, last year, ang last niyang bigay, could you imagine? Kaya ang PhilHealth sa akin, pag dumating, salamat sa Diyos, mirakulo. Pero yung actually to go into laborious looking for it, following up, hindi ko na ginagawa. Nandi-disappoint lang ako. Frances.
Doc, sa akin po, since wala po kaming community exposure, Doc, baka pwede pong community diagnosis, Doc, CDX.
Community diagnosis. Okay, fair enough. Pero CN ka, ikaw mag-report.
Hello?
Hindi, joke lang.
Hello?
Ron, Abby.
Wait lang, Doc. Mag-iisip po ako.
Skip mo na, pass ka.
Sige po,
Monita,
Doc.
balikan kita.
Doc, COVID po.
COVID? Hindi pa ba kayo nagsasawa sa COVID? What about COVID in particular?
Mga po, Doc, siguro new journals or something.
latest on COVID.
Opo, mga ganun po.
Kasi may new variant, ganyan. Sige, tingnan natin. Ronowell,
Doc, pwede po yung CPG ng COVID.
may CPG na ba? Yung nilabas ng PS.
Smith, Doc. July 2020 pa po.
Wala pang update yun eh. Pwede naman. CPG ng COVID. Sige. Abby,
Ano na lang po siguro, Doc. Latest updates po regarding siguro sa plan po ng government sa dissemination ng vaccines po ng COVID.
sige, pwede nating ilamp yung COVID. Tapos, community diagnosis. Sige. Sige. Sige, one. Sige. Hanggang kailan kayo?
Feb 2 po, Doc.
Feb 2. So, may 1 week pa tayo tapos shift out nyo. Sige. Okay. So, next week would be ano bang mas mahirap? COVID on Thursday. Community diagnosis and community organizing would be on Tuesday. Tapos application, of course we could just imagine that your community organizing would be very much different now with people in quarantine, with people in isolation. But there is still more so, actually there is still need to be organized. There is actually more need to become organized in these times and age. But the approach becomes different. Remember your community diagnosis, di ba? Community nutrition, siguro no undergrad mo, bahay-bahay. So for example, how would you approach community organizing, community diagnosis in the background of a pandemic? So aside from discussing that, let us try to look for strategies for para magka-relate. That would be on Thursday. Si PhilHealth ni EJ, sige, sa Tuesday. Simple-simple yung kay EJ, PhilHealth lang gusto niya. Ano pang gusto niyo idagdag sa PhilHealth? DOH, structure ng DOH. Tanong nyo, bakit hindi maalis-alis si Duque sa DOH?
Yun pa pala, Doc. Yung DOH.
Ano yun pa pala, Doc? Ano?
All about DOH, Doc.
All about DOH. Di ba, bakit after all mga, sige nga, may makakasagot ba offhand nang walang nagre-research? Bakit si Duque hindi maalis-alis?
Doc, based sa chismis, Doc, parang family friend po.
Ano?
Family friend po ng Duque ang Duterte.
Bawal magpangalan, naka-ano tayo, na-upload ko yung kasi proof natin to na nagklase tayo, kaya siya naka-upload sa YouTube. Imbes na i-record ko, pinare-record ko na lang sa YouTube. Kaya lately nag-upload ako.
Sorry, Doc.
You look into that. Ayoko yung according to Chismis. Look at his credentials. Maybe he is really credentialed. Sige. Interns, DOH, clerks, PhilHealth. Tapos, sa Thursday, COVID, yung all about COVID sa intern, community diagnosis, kasi hindi nila nadaanan. for the clerks. Fair enough? Our task for next week, tuberculosis kayo on Thursday. So, please be prepared. Alright? Any questions? Wala na.
None na po, Doc.
Alright, thank you for... Sana hindi na bumalik ang Indians. Oh, ay, live pala tayo. Hindi.
Grabe, Dok.
I, actually, it's really not practical for them not to have... Isipin mo, maiipon lang sila. For example, if we stop the clerks now, tapos we are continuing the first, second, and third years, right? So, ibig sabihin nun, if they resume, sabay-sabay silang babalik. So, I'm just saying it because I find it very, right? Even with you. Siyempre, 6 lang kayo. I find it very much easy to engage you because you're just 6 compared when you are 30. Okay? But again, it would be more of a problem to me if maipon sila at hindi sila makapag-clerkship at makabalik agad. So, sana ma-resolve na yung problem. Alright?
Dok,
Anyways,
question po.
yes.
Last.
Hindi pa rin
Doc,
kayo babalik. Wala pang
Oh.
kung yun ang tanong mo. Wala pa. We are waiting for the decision of APMC for official guidelines. And SHED, I think. Parang APMC ang hinihintay ng but all medical schools were informed to hold. Kasi kahit PGH ata parang very limited ang ginawa parang ganun. So we are waiting for that. Yun ba ang tanong mo?
Dok, kasi din po, may kumakalat nga rin po na chismis, Dok, na baka February daw po i-resume. Dok, waiting din po kami for others. Kasi sa ibang school din po, Dok, parang February din po yung sinasabi sa kanila. So,
kasi nga, naghihintay nga ng APMC, they are conjuring up the guidelines that all medical schools should follow. So for example, safety protocols, testing protocols, etc., etc. So for example, kung routine testing, if you are exposed, tapos, for example, truth of the fact is, your private hospitals cannot shoulder testing every 2 weeks. And if you want to finish clerkship, it may be either subsidized pero may expense pa din on your part. So it should be a dialogue between, kaya that's why APMC would be the one to set up the guidelines para all medical schools would follow that guidelines para hindi rin maging issue with the medical students and actually kahit faculty, how it would go about. And talagang gusto na nilang ibalik yung face-to-face because we accept the fact that you cannot go into internship at the very least without having clinical exposure. Kayo na rin ang nagpakita niyan with the video that you, anong contest nga yun? Nung nag-opening ng classes ba yun?
Christmas
Christmas
party
party po, Doc.
Christmas party, Christmas party. Actually, you won with just that segment for me. Yung blind tinuturuan ng iPad, as in, it's really, I know that's how you feel in a nutshell. And it's very hard for you to go into internship na ang kausap mo lang laptop with skills almost not existent, clinical exposure not existent. Kaya nagmamadali na din kayong ibalik sa field. However, again, we have to make sure of your safety. And that goes for the interns as well. Alam ko ng October, muntik kayong binalik. January, muntik kayong binalik. Wala pa din kayong final word.
Dok, baka nakakalimutan ko na mag-PE ng buong buong
Imagine mo, Monina, isipin mo ikaw na yan, intern, dumaan ka sa clerkship. O paano pa kaya itong mga to? Huli ata nitong nag-PE nung second year. OSCE. Okay? Mag-o-OSCE sila. Ang OSCE nila, Barbie doll. Ang OSCE nyo, di ba, with the online, video, Barbie doll. So, it's all simulation, like it or not. Okay? So, eventually, I hope we see each other face-to-face again. Again, community is also a different thing. We will also wait for APMC guidelines with regards to community rotation. Mas mahirap kasi mas mahirap i-control ang environment as far as the community is concerned. Although, mas malinis kami sa ospital for sure. Pero remember, nung pumutok yung coronavirus, our interns in the Green Valley Health Center saw a COVID suspect. Hindi mo naman sila mata-turn away with health center responsibilities. Okay? Balitaan ko kayo. Malalaman naman natin. February, ang chismis.
Opo, Doc, kasi may mga friends po from other med schools po na nagtatanong din, Doc. Actually, Doc, nagbabalitaan na lang yung mga tao. Nagchichikahan na.
Ay, bakit kayo
Opo.
bumili kami hindi pa?
Opo.
Sabay-sabay nga daw yan kasi nga,
Opo.
yun nga, almost everyone's waiting for the APMC guidelines.
May inter-school chismis po kami daw.
Oh, anong chismis? Inter-school chismis.
Nakikibalita kami sa mga ibang school.
Kami face-to-face na. Ba't kayo hindi pa? Andaya naman.
Napapasana all na lang po kami, Doc, sa UP. May mga nag-donate.
Doc UP, nagpe-prepare na sila.
Well, that's the advantage of being the state university. One, they could get the testing for their students. Pangalawa, there would be a lot of altruistic people that would donate, and most of them would donate at PGH, like it or not. But for a private institution like us, it is definitely not feasible, at least the routine testing. So I think the half of that would be subsidized, most likely at cost, or yun nga. Pero that is still a heavy expense to bear. PPE, heavy expense to bear. Although, meron namang mga mga PPE na reusable. Isipin nyo na lang na dagdagan kayo ng lalabhan tsaka scrub suit. Okay? Well, let's just wait for further announcements. So, as of now, we continue with our online platform. Okay, any questions?
Dok, nakita ko na po yung sabi niyo kay Duque. Nag-ano pala siya? Harvard School of Public Health, ganun.
Oo, Harvard School of Public Health, pero parang wala naman siyang dinaanang public. Anyways, isipin nyo, di ba? Balik tayo doon sa DOH. Bakit Sinovac pa din? Diba? I will leave you that with the questions for next Tuesday. Okay? Para meron tayong di-discuss next week. Next week. Alright? Wala nang tanong? Sige, see you Tuesday. If there's none, thank you for a fruitful discussion for today. You could leave the meeting. Alright.